The modern-day Fleet Week, held in the last week of May every year, is a celebration of hope. A family-friendly event with merchandise stalls, flyovers, and a chance for common folk to get a look at the UEE Navy's ships up close. It also allows manufacturers from across the verse a spot away from the usual showrooms to find new customers. With impressive fleet flybys and a chance for civilians to step aboard an in-service Idris-class frigate, Invictus Launch Week is your classic militaristic funfair to garner support and recruit volunteers. But that hasn't always been the case. Fleet Week has a controversial history, one that we're going to explore right now. In the year 2541, first contact was made with the Tevarin in the Elysium system by Dr. Keller Lynch. With advanced shield technology and quantum travel capability, the discovery of the jump point to the system occupied by the warrior race sparked the First Tevarin War. A year after the invasion began, the United Planets of Earth Navy were on the back foot, unable to match the Tevarin's speed and defensive capabilities. Needing to push recruitment to repel the invaders, Naval Command met with the UPE Tribunal and select senators to devise a way to rapidly increase their intake of starmen. Due to the general lack of commercial spaceflight and lax security at the time, but also partially as a propaganda effort, it was agreed that large military transports would be sent to all affiliated systems to recruit volunteers, with the final destination being Invictus Naval Base on Mars, where the recruits would undergo their training. And so Invictus launched on October the 12th, 2542, and would be repeated annually for the entirety of the war, and also the following year in celebration of the victory. Shortly after the decisive Battle of Idris IV, the Tevarin were defeated in 2546, and the Tevarin-controlled systems were brought under the banner of the UPE. One of the heroes of Idris IV was a young army officer serving in 112 Infantry Battalion named Ivar Messer. Following the death of his captain, Messer led his troops to victory in Operation Nemesis, a story of valour that would be later used by the government as a recruitment tool. The details of the first Messer's rise to power are too large to contain within this story of Invictus. But to summarise, Messer used the power and influence granted to him by the government to remove the way the UPE was governed, declaring himself the first Imperator and forming what is now known as the United Empire of Earth. It's here that the history of Fleet Week starts to take a more turbulent turn. As the decades passed, the recruitment transports would still travel across the UEE systems to gather recruits. But with no war to fight, the ranks dwindled. Following the closure of Invictus Base in 2579, Imperator Messer decreed in 2581 that Invictus Launch Week would return as an annual celebration of the UEE Navy, making Invictus an empire-wide holiday with no expense spared. Parties were organised and decorations put up to mark the arrival of the transports, now bound for the naval shipyard in Berea in the Magnus system. Invictus would continue to grow ever more lavish, with a number of landing zones getting vast expo halls made to house displays of the Navy's ships and technologies. Critics of the event saw what Invictus had become as a way to recruit technophiles into service and also as a dominant move to showcase the military might of the Empire, with anti-authoritarian sentiment growing amongst the systems, resulting in the Navy responding to what the Messer regime would dub domestic unrest. At the start of the 27th century, the Tevarin were defeated once again in the Second Tevarin War, with the Purge happening as a direct result of that defeat, the race denouncing their warrior ideology or vanishing to unknown regions of space. The Empire once again at general peace. 30 years later, under the rule of Livia Messer III, the terror system abstained from participating in Invictus entirely in defiant protest of what was seen to be militaristic overreach by Messer. Terran Senator Asan Kiran delivered a rousing speech to call for a vote on terror becoming a sovereign system. During this time period, mentions of Invictus in the history books go quiet, and Senator Kiran's speech would ultimately amount to naught, as the Messer regime used its considerable power to discredit Kiran and the referendum failed, with Kiran disappearing entirely a short time later. Invictus would continue into the 28th century, but a core part of Invictus was about to change. For nearly 150 years, Invictus saw transports going from system to gather recruits, but in the year 2681, this would end. The events would still be held, albeit in smaller numbers, and now Starman potentials would need to self-report to the naval shipyard at Killian for training. With the number of events cut and the large fleet no longer travelling, Invictus became more focused and the event would rotate between major landing zones of the Empire. Within the events, Messer's recruitment units would aggressively promote life in the Navy and the heroism of fighting the latest threat to humanity, the Vanduul. Although a very real threat to the Empire, the Vanduul would play a starring role in an iconic Invictus-themed film. All Tomorrow's Guardians would follow the tactics and recruitment processes of the Navy in one of their vast recruitment centres, culminating in Invictus celebration at Angeli, where a Vandal attack would take place. At the time, this was seen as a classic Messer propaganda move by critics, who then later appreciated the irony of regime fanatics being skewered by Vanduul in a recruitment prop. By the time of Imperator Messer IX's reign, anti-Messer sentiment was at an all-time high. The sickly Galor Messer, who had been disinherited by his mother, was embarrassed by the lack of attendance at Invictus events in the back end of the 2730s. Mandating that celebrating Fleet Week would now be mandatory in 2743, naval ships would now transport civilians to the event centres. Many saw this as an opportunity to meet up with distant family members, fellow activists, or use it to garner support for the anti-establishment cause. Galor's mandate lasted 2 years before a law was enacted that would make not attending punishable by imprisonment. Were you to not attend Invictus, you would be found guilty of unpatriotic behaviour and jailed for a maximum term of 5 years. In reality, though, the law was very rarely used to prosecute Invictus avoiders, and instead used as a justification to arrest anti-Messer activists who would otherwise legally be clean. Unsurprisingly, the unwanted child and unwanted imperator would weaken the Messer era substantially, leading to a revolution. And with the Messers gone and the Vanduul threat ever present, Invictus Launch Week would be needed now more than ever. Before I wrap up the final part of the story, if you've made it this far, thank you very much for your time. Putting videos like this together takes quite some time, with much rechecking, writing, editing, the visuals, the sound, so your attention is really appreciated. If you have any thoughts on the format or presentation, I'd love to hear your feedback in the comments. Now let's continue the story. The first post-Messer Imperator, Erin Toy, was keen to work with Naval Command to reshape the image of Invictus. Following a purge of Messer loyalists from its ranks, there was a great need for the UEE Navy to still host Invictus, but detached from the 2 centuries of militaristic display of dominance. The event was moved from October to May in 2794. The brutalist recruitment centres were replaced with depictions of bravery and messaging of hope. And the 999th Test Squadron would begin performing aerial displays at larger expo events from 2803. The modern Invictus, then, is widely seen as it was initially envisioned. A celebration of heroism from the Empire's military and a chance for normal people of the verse to get up close with the show and support it. There are still critics of Invictus, however, who say that it's far too commercialised and that it's a waste of taxpayers' money. And there we have the brief history of Invictus. I'd like to give a special shout out to Toxford, who always steers me right with his proofreading and anti-procrastination encouragement. And until the next one, fly safe, citizen, and enjoy Fleet Week.